Years ago in South Korea, a young boy named Young, who lived a simple life with his father, Sergeant Park, after tragically losing his mother at a very young age. Even though times were incredibly tough, his father did absolutely everything he could to raise his son alone. Sergeant Park worked the graveyard shift as a highway patrol officer, stepping out into the dangerous night while little Young, who stayed up, praying for his safe return. But one fateful night, duty turned deadly. Sergeant Park pulled over a highly suspicious vehicle. The moment the driver rolled down the window, a suffocating, unnatural chill filled the air. Inside sat two young passengers, completely lifeless and staring blankly ahead, as if trapped under a sinister hypnotic trance. More alarming still was the driver's hand, sporting a grotesque, cursed ring shaped like a crow. Sensing immediate danger, the officer demanded a breathalyzer test. Instead, the driver slammed on the gas, dragging the officer down the asphalt before brutally casting him aside to die. The devastating news reached little Young who rushed to the hospital only to find his father clinging to life on a ventilator. Desperate, the boy ran to a local church, begging a priest to help him save his dad. The priest handed him a crucifix necklace, assuring him that if he prayed with absolute sincerity, God would grant a miracle. Young, who spent the entire night on his knees, weeping and praying for his father's survival. But the miracle never came. The next morning, his father flatlined and passed away. Shattered by grief and feeling utterly betrayed, Young, whose sorrow instantly morphed into blinding rage, he charged back into the church, violently ripped the crucifix from his neck, and hurled it directly at the statue of Jesus, completely abandoning his faith. Years passed, but the trauma remained. One night, a grown-up Young, who woke up gasping from a vivid dream. In it, his late father appeared as a spirit, gently placing a glowing, protective hand over his chest. The little boy who lost everything grew up to become a lethal weapon. Flash forward to the present day, and Young, who is now a world-famous, undefeated MMA champion, dominating the light heavyweight division. But behind the glitz and glamour lies a deeply broken man driven by pure, unadulterated rage. He channels all of his inner torment into his fights, brutally dismantling anyone who steps inside the cage with him. During a massive championship bout in the United States, Young, who is easily picking his opponent apart. But right as he moves in for the knockout, his eyes catch a glimpse of a giant tattoo on his opponent's back, a menacing, stylized image of a crow. The visual instantly triggers a severe PTSD flashback, dragging his mind straight back to the night his father was murdered by the man with the crow ring. Blinded by a sudden spike of demonic fury, Young, who loses all control, he relentlessly beats his opponent half to death. Ignoring the referee's desperate attempts to stop the fight, victory brought no peace. On the flight back home to South Korea, Young, who tried to sleep, but the shadows in his mind refused to rest. He plunged into a terrifying waking nightmare, hearing a chorus of eerie, mocking whispers that seemed to echo from the very depths of hell itself. Suddenly, the cross necklace his father had given him years ago, the very one he had violently thrown away, reappeared out of nowhere, burning with a strange, celestial heat. The phantom jewelry wrapped itself tightly around his right hand, searing into his flesh. Young, who bolted upright in his seat, gasping for air as a sharp, agonizing pain shot through his arm. When he looked down, his hand was dripping with fresh blood. A deep, mysterious puncture wound had opened up right in the center of his palm, resembling a classic stigmata. Seeking immediate answers, he rushed to a hospital the moment he landed. But the medical doctors were completely baffled. All his scans came back perfectly normal, leaving Young, who entirely alone with a bleeding wound that science couldn't explain. The mystery only deepened at night. Back in his apartment, Young, who tried to rest, but the moment he closed his eyes, the bleeding wound in his palm began to throb with intense pain. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted. From the pitch-black corners of his bedroom, shadowy, grotesque entities began to manifest, crawling across the ceiling and whispering his name in a distorted, haunting chorus. Terrified and unable to defend himself against ghosts, Young, who spent his nights locked in a sleepless, agonizing loop of paranoia. Desperate for any kind of relief, his manager suggested they visit a highly recommended local shaman named Hong Jin. The blind shaman took one look at Young, whose bleeding hand, and recoiled in shock. She revealed that the wound was no ordinary medical injury. It was a spiritual beacon. Dark, malevolent forces had completely surrounded surrounded him, drawn to his deep internal rage. However, she noted a bizarre contradiction. An invisible holy barrier was simultaneously protecting his soul from being entirely consumed by the encroaching evil. The shaman pointed him toward a specific Catholic church, promising that a powerful holy man inside held the key to silencing the whispers. Driven by pure desperation, Yong, who rode his motorcycle through the dead of night, arriving at a massive ancient cathedral completely swarming with hundreds of eerie, ominous crows. Stepping past the heavy wooden doors, he followed a trail of chilling, distorted shrieks into the dim sanctuary. There, he witnessed an elderly priest, Father N, desperately attempting to perform an intense exorcism on a young man violently possessed by a demonic entity. The scene was pure chaos. The possessed man possessed unnatural, superhuman strength, easily breaking free from his heavy leather restraints and violently throwing the older priest across the room like a ragdoll. As the demon lunged forward to deliver a fatal strike to the defenseless father and Yong, whose protective instincts flared, he instinctively sprinted into the fray, tackling the possessed man to the ground. But the moment the demon made physical contact with Yong, it shrieked in absolute agony, as if its skin was being branded by liquid fire. The demon recoiled, staring at Yong, whose right hand in absolute horror, sensing an overwhelming divine power radiating from the bleeding wound. Seizing the opportunity, Father N quickly barked instructions, telling the champion to pin the thrashing vessel down. As Yong slammed his bleeding palm directly onto the possessed man's chest, a brilliant, blinding flash of white-hot holy fire exploded from his stigmata. The malevolent spirit shrieked a final, agonizing death rattle before being entirely incinerated by the sacred flames, leaving the young man unconscious but completely freed from the curse. Exhausted and thoroughly overwhelmed by the supernatural display, Yong, who collapsed to the floor, instantly falling into a deep, peaceful sleep. For the first time in years, the mocking demonic whispers in his head were entirely silent. The next morning, a grateful Father N watched over him, recognizing the wound immediately. He gently explained that the mark was a stigmata, a rare, divine blessing granted only to a chosen few to fight against the escalating forces of darkness. Despite the priest's profound revelation, the deeply cynical fighter rejected the call, declaring he wanted absolutely nothing to do with God or his spiritual warfare. But fate had other plans. While Yong, tried to return to his normal routine, Father N tracked down a lead on a terrifying new threat, Ji Shin, a charismatic cult leader known as the Bishop of Darkness. Deep beneath a luxury nightclub, Ji Shin ran a sinister underground coven. He maintained his unnaturally youthful appearance by sacrificing innocent souls to an ancient, multi-armed demonic entity known as the Sacred Serpent. Through dark water rituals and blood pacts, the Shadow Bishop was actively spreading a wave of demonic possessions across the city. Recognizing that he couldn't stop this rising tide of pure evil alone, Father N visited Yong, at his training gym. He made a desperate, heartfelt plea, asking the champion to use his divine gift to help protect the innocent. Yong coldly refused, but as the elderly priest walked away, a heavy wave of guilt and a strange sense of duty began to tug at the fighter's hardened heart. The emotional tug proved too strong. Yong, ultimately chose to join Father N, and the duo set out to investigate an unsettling new case involving a young woman named Sujin. During the drive, the grizzled priest and the cynical fighter began to form an unexpected, genuine bond, with Father N offering the fatherless champion a sense of warmth he hadn't felt in decades. But their heartwarming moment was cut brutally short when they stepped into Sujin's home. The air was thick with malice, and the moment the exorcism ritual began, a highly aggressive, high-ranking demon manifested inside the girl. The entity possessed terrifying telekinetic powers, sending furniture flying across the room and violently pinning Father N to the wall. Recognizing Yong, the demon began to play a vicious psychological game. It shifted its voice, mimicking the exact agonizing screams of Yong, whose dying father on the highway. The voice taunted him, claiming that his father's soul was currently burning in the deepest pits of hell, designed specifically to break the fighter's spirit and paralyze him with grief. The demon's taunts landed like a physical blow, but instead of crushing him, they ignited a furnace of righteous fury deep within Yong, chest. He realized the entity was desperate to distract him. With a roar of defiance, he lunged forward, ignoring the flying debris. He didn't fight like a man, he fought like a vengeful storm. He grabbed the possessed girl and slammed his glowing, stigmata-marked hand directly against her forehead. The holy fire surged, brighter and hotter than ever before, acting like a spiritual cauterizing iron. The demon shrieked as its connection to the host was violent violently severed, dissolving into black smoke that vanished into the ether. Sujin collapsed, finally free. However, the victory was short-lived. Through his spiritual link to the girl, Jishin, the Shadow Bishop, had been watching the entire encounter. He sensed the massive spike in divine power and realized that Yong, who was no longer just a random target, he was the primary threat to his dark empire. The real war for the city's soul had officially begun. The Shadow Bishop went on the offensive, using a series of calculated, insidious moves to target those closest to the church. Jishin shapeshifted his appearance, disguising himself as a regular priest to infiltrate a local Catholic orphanage. There, he targeted a vulnerable young orphan boy named Hosuk, manipulating the child into accepting a cursed artifact. When father and later visited the orphanage, the brainwashed boy attacked the elderly priest with unnatural, demonic strength. In the frantic scuffle, a tragic accident occurred, leaving the young boy dead and father and deeply devastated by guilt and sorrow. Exploiting this emotional vulnerability, Jishin orchestrated a trap, luring father An to a secluded hospital morgue. When Yong, who arrived to protect his mentor, he found the priest held hostage by the Dark Bishop. Jishin issued a chilling ultimatum: surrender the supernatural stigmata power in his hand, or watch father An die. Refusing to let the young champion sacrifice his soul, father An made a heroic, heartbreaking choice. He stabbed his own face with a serpent's poisoned fang, breaking the villain's leverage. As the deadly venom spread through father An's body, a panicked Yong, who carried him to Father Choi's house, praying desperately for a miracle. When none came, a furious Yong, who chose to take matters into his own hands. Donning a Vatican-blessed cassock given to him by Father Choi, he tracked Jishin to the Babylon nightclub. At the entrance, a horde of possessed guards swarmed the fighter. Yong, who uncovered his blessed armor, poured holy water onto his stigmata wound, and unleashed explosive holy flames, burning the evil spirits away. Deep underground, a desperate Jishin stabbed his own heart with a poisonous fang, transforming into a horrifying half-human, half-snake monster. The beast easily overpowered Yong, who, knocking him unconscious. In the void between worlds, Yong, who reunited with his father's spirit, who granted him a massive awakening of divine energy. Jolting awake with a blindingly brilliant stigmata, Yong, who unleashed a torrent of white holy fire, completely obliterating the monster, melting the poisonous fangs, and instantly curing father and miles away. The multi-armed serpent dragged the failed bishop down to hell. Days later, Father An and an undefeated champion turned Vatican exorcist arrived in Rome, ready to hunt the next shadow. What did you think of this insane supernatural thriller? Let me know in the comments below, smash that like button, and subscribe for more elite movie recaps.